Your favourite guest, Dr. Nachi Sinha, is on the line, continuing our series on workplace bullying, and today it's damaging effects of workplace bullying on employees. Good afternoon, Doctor.
Good afternoon, Toby. Thank you for having me. A favourite guest, that's a bit of a stretch, isn't it? I mean, yes. Come on.
Your favourite guest of the last 30 seconds. There are a lot more damaging effects of workplace bullying than we might actually think, aren't there?
Yes, that's correct. You're right. I mean, and we have been doing this series on bullying, of course, and we've gone through different factors, and and coming to after why all this hoo-ha about bullying to begin with, right? So today's conversation obviously is important in that. So humiliation and embarrassment are not the only effects of bullying. Let's put it like that.
Yes.
I mean, they are, so let's count that too. But victims go through extreme anxiety and confidence problems. They often face trouble communicating and trusting people. And apart from this, the employee also faces several health issues, and that impacts, their work performance too. So it's quite a bit of a set of problems, yeah.
Yeah. So what are the main damaging effects of workplace bullying?
The first and the most damaging thing that comes to mind, Toby, is the role of workplace bullying, of course, is the confidence issues, right? I mean, when an employee is mocked or belittled by their coworker, the confidence is badly shaken. They face difficulty communicating with their team members and voicing their ideas in meetings or gatherings. And the bullied employee feels that, they're not good enough like the coworkers and also forces themselves to think of themselves as a sort of lesser than others. And this kind of shatters the confidence. And so the employee sort of withdraws themselves from actively participating in workplace activities. So now, if you remember, one time we talked about, bullying itself, or part of the bullying itself, one of the signs was that the person was sort of purposefully being ignored, right? So now, I'm already being ignored, and this is now affecting my confidence. So add to it, I'm also withdrawing. So you can imagine how lonely that existence becomes. And to save them, themselves from further humiliation, the victim might start to, skip days at work, so they don't have to face the bully on a daily basis.
Yeah. Could that result in some stress, maybe, if they've got a lot of work to catch up on when they come back?
Right. And that is definitely a severely stressful situation. I mean, working in a toxic environment is mentally draining for the person, right? I mean, and when a person or a group enjoys teasing and making fun of an employee, you're treating them aggressively, it gives them a lot of stress. Now, each day, the victim sort of worries about what bullies will say to them, or embarrass them, or how that would happen, in front of whom. So you can imagine what's going on in the mind of the victim as they're approaching work. Now, constant stress sort of builds up and it deteriorates, the victim's mental and physical health. And it also sort of, that's where, Toby, if you remember, I'm sorry, I'm referencing the book. This isn't a plug for the book, by the way. But just one mentioning that, the significance of why stress and all that it does for us is important here. So it kind of triggers anxiety, right, which can also lead to panic attacks. So when the victim is worried about something under great stress, it's hard for them to perform well, right? So they'll have trouble concentrating on work and doing their best to execute the assigned tasks. So once again, you have this, vicious circle, so to speak, going round and round.
Yeah. And stress just causes a lot of issues, doesn't it?
That's correct. I mean, stress is the root cause of many health problems, physical and mental, of course. So being under stress for a long time can trigger, things like panic attacks, right? And so when an employee is severely stressed about bullies, the anxiety goes up. And, the anxiety sort of multiplies when the employee also has to deal with bullies and mistreatment on a regular basis. So stress and anxiety sort of together induce this phenomenon of a panic attack, right? The person finds trouble moving and breathing and feels heaviness in the chest. It's a very scary feeling. It's almost like you get this intense sense of doom and gloom, and you can't breathe, and you feel like you're going to die at that moment. And it's quite a scary thing to go through. And so suppose, a person gets panic attacks at a workplace. In that case, the other employees and bosses think that, that maybe it's not physically and mentally fit to work. and people start distancing themselves from the victim. And sometimes bullies even end up making more fun, of the victim because of the disturbed health. So the strange behavior of people against stress and employees of the victim's mental health, it just becomes sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy of some sort. And the victim gets trapped in this unbreakable cycle of sort of, stress, panic attacks, and social isolation at the workplace. And as I'm talking about all this, Toby, you can see what a sinister picture is emerging, right? Compared to the first conversation we had about this, where we were talking about pranks and jokes, and just look at what this develops into, right?
Yeah. And that just there, could that result in a lack of motivation and productivity?
Right. And this is where it's important for the people at work, the managers, this employers, to realize that it's counterproductive for them not to do something about this. Because when an employee, when a victim or employee is recognized, appreciated, and rewarded for the performance, the motivation level goes up, right? Basic human tendency, right? And, one is full with enthusiasm and perform, even well the next time. For example, when you made the comment, here's the most favored guest. I mean,
yes.
A decent human being would have felt good about it. But in my case, the compliment didn't work, Toby.
Oh.
But that was an example of how, saying nice things motivates people. But motivation and productivity are interlinked, right? So if the employee is motivated, their productivity and performance will also increase, and vice versa.
Yeah.
Now, on the other hand, though, if an employee is constantly ridiculed, like in the case of bullying, belittled or yelled at by the superior, or other colleagues, the motivation will take a sharp decline. I mean, that is bound to happen. Now, because of this low motivation, though, the productivity and performance also gets affected, right? So highly motivated employees are the organization's biggest asset. I mean, that's what everybody wants. Their passion, motivation and productivity provide the organization with better results. But when the employees are demotivated, the work quality is low, and ultimately the organization suffers the most. I mean, so not acting on bullies is not just a problem for the victim as an individual, but it's a problem for the company itself. And the sooner they realize that, the better.
Yeah. We talked earlier about mental health just a second ago. Could workplace bullying also affect your physical health? Right.
I mean, that's an important point. I mean, stress and anxiety, they not only have an implication for our mental health, but they do affect our physical health too. Like now, being under constant stress, I mean, the thought of the bullies and the next move sort of constantly, kind of invades your mind. It results in health issues like increased blood pressure, acidity, stress headaches, stomach aches, sweating, increased heart rate, things like that. Now, sick employees are not positioned to give their best. So along with the employee, the company also, gets affected. So there are plenty of cases, Toby, sort of shared by people on how their health was affected due to the bullying behavior of the co-workers. I mean, the stories about how, this lady was constantly bullying my colleagues and ended up developing a sort of an eating disorder. And, but the bullies still continued and it further enhanced the problem and then leading on to, bladder and kidney issues. And, and this isn't a story that I made up. This is one of the documented cases published in some journal and so on. So it just kind of multiplies the problem.
And mental health and physical health is all linked, isn't it? So could a physical health problem like that one result in depression? Right.
Great question. Right. Prolonged bullying, at the workplace and strained mental health and constant stress pushes the victim into depression, clinical depression. It's an important thing to understand because this constant stress leads to that. And when a person has no other option than to suffer or quit the job, I mean, the victim is trapped in the dilemma. So if they choose to continue with the job, they must endure the bully's behavior. On the other hand, if they choose to quit, the fear of, financial problems are there. So the constant battle, the conflict that gets created, stay or quit, combined with, by the way, the bully's behavior and the financial stress that one is going through. And imagine if one is already susceptible to depression, all these things develop, lead towards clinical depression. Now, if the victim isn't helped and the depression worsens, then you can only imagine how this would impact their personal and social life. And
it can have such a big impact on your personal life, can't it?
Yeah, because you see, let's kind of look at this picture from a different perspective here. There are days, when we are physically and mentally exhausted, right, from working long hours.
Yeah.
We don't feel like talking to our family members during those days, or even hanging out with our friends. We kind of like sleeping a bit, resting our minds and bodies to kind of take care of the exhaustion. But when an employee is bullied, they feel mentally and physically drained. Constantly, right? So this constant stress, anxiety, depression, and recalling of the bullying experience make them feel very tired. That itself is a sign of mental illness that's developing. They don't like spending time with the family. Instead, they channel their anger and negative feelings on their kid and spouse because their irritability goes up along with the stress. So you see a picture already developing of depression secondary to all the stress that one is going through. So now, suddenly, the family life is also being impacted. So what was supposed to be protective is now getting impacted too. The workplace culture environment directly influence an employee's family life.
Yeah.
And so, just to give an example, suppose the employee is happy at the workplace. In that case, they'll feel fresh and happy at home, even if they're physically exhausted, right? So you can see what difference the culture makes. And that again, once again, when one is asking that question, should I stay or should I go? You got to keep the entire thing in mind. Sometimes we don't take into account the intangible costs that we might not notice.
Yeah. And could that depression also be caused by the fact that the victim might be blaming themselves for everything and maybe not even realising that they are a victim of bullying?
Right. And that's the trick, isn't it? The bully kind of makes the victim believe that the victim deserves to be treated badly and harassed, right? That is their sort of a trick. Now, the employee begins, trusting the bully into believing that maybe they are incompetent, especially if they have nowhere to talk to and no sort of person to tell them otherwise. Now, the more the employee is bullied, the more the victim blames themselves for it. And they believe that, they're not worthy of respect like other employees because there's something wrong with them. After all, that's what the bully keeps telling them, right? So apart from self-blaming, the victim is now also battling with a sense of guilt, right? They feel guilty for allowing the bully to disrespect them and suffer because of them. So now you see this huge conflict. On one hand, as a victim, I believe what I'm being told. On the other hand, I'm feeling guilty for making the bully believe me. So it's this constant stress. Now, in many situations, the employee is shackled by guilt and self-blaming, which is when, you also notice that this is what stops them from taking any action against the bully. So when we ask ourselves, well, why doesn't he do something? Why don't you do something? That's a classic example of victim shaming, blaming the victim for what's happening to them as if it's their fault, right? So we're not realizing the victim is brainwashed by the bully, and that's the bully that's at fault here. Hence, but the victim thinks that they are at fault, so they deserve to be treated disrespectfully. Thus, when the victim is told to report the bullying behavior, they will doubt themselves and will hesitate, to end the bullying behavior just because they have now, begun to believe what the bully was telling them and start to think that they are responsible for bringing the misery on themselves. And this is a very sad state of affairs because what you're noticing by now is that the mind has become enslaved, right? It's now abused to an extent where it's stuck in that frame.
Yeah. Well, we've talked about the 8 damaging effects of workplace bullying on employees this afternoon. What would be your overall message today?
So, thank you, Toby. it's a very sad state of affairs as we were talking about this, and
Yes.
but so it's to put it back in context. Of course, surviving in a toxic workplace, is a horrible experience for any person.
Yeah.
Let's put that straight. Now, demeaning jokes, racist remarks, hurtful comments, pranks, they all have an effect on the person's confidence and concentration levels, right? They feel disturbed and anxious throughout the day, and that has a negative impact on the performance. So if you are the victim of bullying or know someone who's battling the torture of bullying, please don't stay quiet.
Yeah.
Take some steps, take some concrete steps to end bullying and report the person, do what you can. But please don't ignore it and don't keep quiet. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, we'll have you on again next week to talk about the one that's going to make a lot of people look in the mirror. We're going to discuss, are you a bully? Yes, I'm talking to you. So we'll see you next week for that.
Thank you, Toby. Thank you.